Hello, everyone who's joining us. Thanks for coming in. Numbers are still ticking up, so we'll get started here with some of the formalities at the beginning as people continue to join. But thank you so much for being here with us today and this afternoon, and welcome to another Capitol Live event brought to you by Spotlight PA. I'm Christopher Baxter, the Executive Director and Editor-in-Chief of Spotlight PA. For those of you who might be new to our work or our event programming, Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan newsroom producing investigative and accountability journalism about the state capitol and urgent statewide issues. We share all of our journalism at no cost with more than 70 community newsrooms across the state, all part of our mission to better inform and empower Pennsylvanians everywhere. Our work is driven by a deep sense of public service, and it's informed and powered by you, our readers. As many of you know, we've taken the unusual, perhaps unprecedented step in Pennsylvania of dedicating a reporter this year to the issue of redistricting. We've been able to do this thanks to the generous support of our readers and members who have clearly and unequivocally told us that redistricting is a topic that needs and deserves more attention and scrutiny. We heard you and we made this happen. Our redistricting reporter, Marie Albijes, will lead today's interview with Senator David Argall, chairman of the Senate State Government Committee. But first, a few important items. We provide these vital public service events on the honor system. We're able to keep attendance free for all by asking those who are able to make a contribution of any amount and become a member of Spotlight PA. So I'm asking everyone who is able and who hasn't already to take a moment right now and pay what you can for this event by visiting spotlightpa.org/donate. Again, the address is spotlightpa.org/donate. I've also put a link in the chat. Again, this is entirely an honor system, but we do rely on your support to cover our costs for these events. Again, the address is spotlightpa.org/donate. Thank you. And thank you to all of our current members who have already made contributions who are joining us today. I know a lot of you are out there and we're excited to have you for another event. A few last housekeeping items. Thank you to all who have sent questions in advance. We will get to as many of those as possible. If you have not yet asked a question, you can use the Q&A feature here in Zoom. To do so, simply click the Q&A icon in the bottom toolbar and type in your question. I'll be moderating those in the background and we'll get to as many of those as possible. Second, we're recording today's event, so those who are unable to make it can catch up later, or if you have to leave early, the recording will be available later on our website, spotlightpa.org. And finally, I want to thank our many partners, but in particular, VoteBeat, a national reporting project focusing on critical issues surrounding voting and elections. VoteBeat and many of our other partner newsrooms help make this redistricting initiative possible. Last but not least, I'm so excited to introduce our redistricting reporter, Marie Albijes, who will lead today's discussion. Marie, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chairman Argall, for joining us today. I know you're very busy and it's the summer, so we'll try not to keep you for too long. I want to go over a little bit of background on redistricting. While we have people watching today who are probably very well informed about the redistricting process, I don't want to skip over the basics for anyone who might not be as familiar with what you'll be tasked with doing this year. So as chair of the Senate State Government Committee, you'll be one of the lawmakers responsible for vetting and approving the bill that will outline the way Pennsylvania's congressional districts will look for the next 10 years. And that will help set the course for how Pennsylvanians are represented in DC. And this year you have the added challenge of having to eliminate one congressional district, as the latest US Census population data shows that Pennsylvania is growing more slowly than other states. So that means, one of our seats and one of our electoral college votes has been allocated to another faster growing state. So my first question to you is, what have your conversations been like so far with your colleagues, both in the state legislature and in Congress, regarding how you're going to go about eliminating that district?
Well, the range is extraordinary. I've heard from some of our members that say, oh, Republican-led House, Republican-led Senate, Democratic governor, we're never going to agree. The state Supreme Court is going to have to do this. I hope that we can do better than that. Senator Sharif Street represents a district very different from mine. He is the Democratic chairman, the minority chairman of the Senate State Government Committee. Sharif and I have had several conversations where our goal is to try to do this on a bipartisan basis, have it approved by the Senate, have it approved by the House, get it to the governor's desk for his signature. That's the goal.
How much input are you planning on receiving, or have you already received from the congressional members who, I mean, this is going to affect them the most?
There's been a limited number of discussions. I think most members are waiting to see what the numbers actually look like. Right now, all we have is estimates because of COVID. The Census Bureau is late, and so we're not going to see final numbers until August or September. So I quite honestly had expected to hear more from them by now, but I simply haven't.
Right, so we won't get that data until mid-August. So, you know, you have the summer now. What, if anything, can you start doing? Are you just kind of looking based on estimates, or, you know, are you kind of twiddling your thumbs? I'm sure that's the latter isn't it, but, you know, what is going on right now?
Yeah, this committee is one of the busiest in the House and Senate. We have met several times on a variety of issues, on right to know, on COVID, on congressional redistricting, on state redistricting rules. And so the one, I think, critical issue so far is we held our first hearing last month. We heard from a variety of good government groups. We heard from the Center for Rural Pennsylvania about population estimates. We've heard from statisticians on how to really interpret the data. We have another public hearing in July in Philadelphia. We've been asked to do another one in Erie. And so, yeah, there's no shortage of folks that we're trying to gain input from.
And that meeting, I'm sure some of our audience today caught that meeting. It went over a lot of kind of the criteria for redistricting, criteria that different groups with different opinions will want to see that different criteria prioritized in various ways. So what are your takeaways from that meeting, and what are your priorities for what you want the map to look like when you're weighing in, you know, the needs of the incumbent Congress people and your own party and that sort of thing?
I think the key is that we believe we can do better than it's been done in the past. When we finally come up with our map, we're not just going to drop it on the member's desk and say, it's the best we can do. We're going to talk about why we made the decisions that we did. We're going to try to be more open and transparent in the past. And if I get my way, there will be many fewer divided municipalities than in the past.
Why is that important to you?
Because, and I realize, gerrymandering is not a new issue, all right? Governor Gary was what, 1812, all the way back in Massachusetts, and in England, they've been arguing about this since I think the 1200s. And so this is an old issue. It's very, very political. Certainly in the United States, it's become not just partisan, but hyper partisan. But I think that when you have a community, especially a small community, and half of the voters have to communicate with one congressman, and the other half of the little town have to communicate with a completely different congressman hundreds of miles away, I think you can understand why that breeds some distrust in the system.
You said yourself that you like having your home county of Schuylkill all together. What would you kind of, besides keeping communities of interest, keeping municipalities together, are there any kind of other high-ranking criteria? I mean, are you willing to kind of put that priority even lower for something else, like keeping an incumbent of your own party in the seat?
I mean, the Constitution lays it out: compact, contiguous, equality of population. There's a lot of things that we need to do. But I think in the past, the mistake has been made, sometimes at court directive, to try to get the population so perfect that it means you're splitting up precincts, you're splitting up neighborhoods, you're splitting up small towns. And understand, the census is never going to be perfect. The day it's taken, it's not a perfect document. And then the next day, people are born, people die, people move up the street. And so this idea that we need to get it down to 1 or 2 or 3 people in a district of 700,000 or 800,000 people is to me kind of crazy. And so, yes, my goal will be to try to maintain counties, to maintain cities, to maintain precincts and school districts. And so that's going to be our goal. Understand that I'm chairman of the committee, but I still only have 1 out of 50 votes. And there's 203 representatives in the House who are going to be anxious to weigh into this as well. And then there's the governor that gets the final say.
That's a good point to make. I mean, who are kind of your close confidants when you're debating, what this map should look like? I'm guessing you said, Senator Sharif Street, your counterparts in the House. I'm guessing, at least your own caucus's leadership. But am I missing anyone there?
No, and I've had brief conversations with Representative Grove, Representative Davidson, who are the 2 chairs in the House, Republican and Democrat. I suspect probably Sharif Street and I will be spending a lot of time on this issue. And, I've only had this job for 5 months, but I'll say that he and I have developed, I think, a very good working relationship. And it's curious because I have a district that voted, I think this county voted 70% for Donald Trump. I doubt that Donald Trump carried 1 precinct anywhere in Sharif Street's Senate district, but still we treat each other with respect, and hopefully we can just get this difficult job accomplished.
You said you didn't want it to be like last decade where, the bill comes out and then a few days later, or even 30 minutes later, or an hour later, the legislature votes on the bill. So what is your plan for allowing the public to weigh in on what the map should look like? And then, is it going to be, the map is presented and y'all vote on it, or will you have a period of time where people can weigh in on what you guys have developed?
We're going to try to be as open as possible. There will be a website, there will be social media, there will be public hearings. Understand, this isn't the only issue we're working on. This is a very busy committee, but I do think that we should try to be more open and transparent than in the past.
So, I mean, you've already called for public hearings, like you said, leading up to it, just hearing from people about what they want their districts to look like. But can you answer specifically for after you guys have developed it? There's going to be a compressed timeline, so we're probably looking at sometime in the late fall. Do you think that there's time for the public to weigh in, for you guys to even go around the state and hear whether there needs to be tweaks or not?
I would certainly hope so. Again, a lot will depend on how quickly we get the data, how quickly we can assemble the consensus between the House and the Senate. And so there's going to be a lot of moving parts on this. We should be glad we only have to do it once every 10 years.
So what are you thinking of in terms of timeline for when you want this either, signed by Governor Wolf, or if there is going to be litigation, having that play out? What are you looking at in terms of timeline?
I would say as soon as we get the data, we really need to hit the ground running.
So is there a plan for either moving the primary date in March or the filing date, or having the 2022 candidates run under the current maps instead?
No one knows at this point. It's just literally too soon to say. I hope we don't have to do any of those things, but I understand that, again, this is there are some nasty realities plugged into this.
Right. So I want to switch gears a little bit. We've gotten a lot of questions about the legislative and congressional redistricting after LACRA, which I know you're familiar with, but as a quick explanation for our audience who might not know what this is a bill that would require your committee as well as the commission in charge of drawing the legislative maps to hold public meetings around the state, receive public comments or written comments, allow people to submit their own versions of the district maps. It would require a website, like you said, and it would require the committee to provide an explanation for how the map complies with redistricting criteria. And it also has a provision that prohibits lawmakers from drawing plans that unduly favor one party or another. You've got 25 senators, including 6 Republicans in the Senate that have co-sponsored the Senate version. In the House, you've got almost 90, I think, legislators. You've got counties and municipalities that have signed on to a resolution asking you guys to pass this. And I know you said at a Fair Districts PA event in April that you would agree to report a bill on this subject, referring to gerrymandering, out in the next 2 months. So we're coming up on those 2 months now. So a lot of questions we got was, why haven't you called this particular bill up for a vote in committee yet?
Again, we've been dealing with legislative reapportionment chairman. We reported that one out unanimously. The right to know, the Sunshine Act, wasted vaccinations, the book VAR fiasco with the constitutional amendment, the election of lieutenant governor, voter ID, welfare reform. So we've been busy. That's, I guess, maybe the bad news for the proponents of Senate Bill 222. The good news is we did the public hearing. We listened to, I wanted to say both sides, but there's more than 2 sides on this issue. We listened to many different perspectives. And so we do have a potential amendment that we have asked both Republicans and Democrats to look at. If we've achieved consensus on that, I would hope to have the bill reported out next week.
And can you go into detail about what that amendment is?
It's a little early, but I'll say that we're trying to focus on the areas of broad agreement. And I think the one agreement is that we try to preserve municipal, county, school district boundaries. That one comes through loud and clear. And that one you don't have to interpret. I think everybody can say, okay, right now I'm sitting in Monoy City in Schuylkill County. Up there on the mountain is the line between Monoy City and Mahanoy Township. Not difficult to determine. Some of the other things in the bill, we're afraid that no matter how hard you try, you may not be able to define them. And then what happens? Then judges end up making definitions, and they don't always listen to the legislative intent. I worked on a bill 30 years ago as a young staff member in the House of Representatives, where we thought we were dealing just with putting bad actors out of business who were running roadside menageries with sick and dying animals up in the Poconos. And the Game Commission read what we had written and closed down the Hershey Zoo, or threatened to close down the Hershey Zoo. And so I learned at a very early age that if we don't get the definition right, someone else is going to rewrite it for us. And so we're trying to look for those broad areas of interpretation where everyone agrees that yes, X means X, Y means Y, and I hope to know more on that in just the next few days.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that the broad agreement or consensus is around making sure that localities, municipalities aren't split and having clearly defined language around that. Is that right?
Correct.
So can you kind of—
You said it a lot faster than I did.
Can you say what other kind of broad agreements or perhaps disagreements you've had when you're kind of looking at this bill?
I'm waiting to hear back literally today. And so far everything's been going very well, but no one has signed yet on the dotted line and said, hooray, we're going to be able to report this out unanimously.
Who exactly are you waiting on? I mean, who could you say which group?
All the members of the committee, as well as I've spoken to Senator Lisa Buscola, She's the Democrat from the Easton Bethlehem area who is the prime sponsor of the bill.
So what does that mean for what will be in the final version that isn't in this version now? I mean, what might people not see in the final bill?
Again, it's too soon to say, but I hesitate to say final version of the bill. This is only the version of the bill that can get the number of votes to get out of the Senate State Government Committee. I'm under no illusion that the other 40 senators may not have some contrary ideas. And then of course there's 203 members of the House. So this is literally just the second step on the ladder. It's been introduced. Now we're trying to assemble a majority to get it out of committee.
Okay. And I know that you've filed a version of this bill for a while, at least when you were in the state house. And like you've said, it never really got anywhere because people just weren't aware of the subject or they just didn't care. Are there iterations of your previous bills that you think have made it through into this one?
I think the goal about preserving municipal boundaries is the key that most people seem to be able to understand.
And so I know, recognizing that this is still a kind of in its infancy stage, have you had conversations with your counterparts in the House or with Governor Wolf's office about this?
Limited discussions in the House and no discussions with the governor's office.
Okay, gotcha. And I'm sorry to push back a little bit on this, but I understand that you have been very busy as chairman, and like you said, having been on the job for 5 months. But like you said, it's been a priority of yours, even when you were back in the House. So why delay now? I mean, you said at the April 28th meeting that this was going to happen in 2 months. You've had at least one meeting. You could get this on the books, and if you're already doing the meetings anyway, why not just bring it up for a vote in committee now?
My goal isn't to put up a bill that fails. I don't think that does anyone any good. My goal is to try to assemble a working bipartisan majority that will actually vote to approve this legislation. That takes longer.
Okay. You've also had to, I don't know if you were chairman at this point in time, but there's been bills and constitutional amendments in the past to create independent redistricting commissions. We're too late for that now because it needs to be passed by the General Assembly in 2 consecutive sessions and then approved by voters. And obviously we're in the redistricting decade now, but I'm wondering if you could kind of share your thoughts on whether you support that kind of system versus what we have now as the status quo.
My personal preference is to continue to allow the members of the House and Senate who are elected to represent the people of their districts to continue to have some say on this issue as they have for the last couple hundred years. And in my classes as an adjunct professor, I often use the quote attributed to Winston Churchill and about democracy being the worst form of government ever devised by man, except of course for all of the other forms of government. And so I'm well aware that the system has been abused, but I also understand that the founding fathers got some things right. And I don't want to disenfranchise every voter who has voted for every legislator along the way and just take the current system, throw it on the trash heap and start out again with a completely different system. My fear, and I spoke with Fair Districts and the League of Women Voters on this issue several times, is that I think this is an issue that you have to do slice by slice by slice. I know some people want the whole loaf. The old joke here in town is anyone that wants the whole loaf usually goes home hungry. And so I'm trying to find those pieces of this issue that people agree on, get that done, and then next year we can argue about the next piece. In my doctoral dissertation at Penn State 15 years ago, I used a textbook definition of difficult problems that it called them the wicked problems. It was an attribute of those problems with multiple conflicting definitions and no clear solutions, whose necessarily imperfect solutions beget further problems. If ever there was a wicked problem, it's gerrymandering, it's redistricting, it's reapportionment. Again, as I said, they're arguing about this in the British Parliament since the 1200s. And so, this was an issue for the time with George Washington. This was an issue for the Quakers, for God's sakes, in William Penn's era, were accused of gerrymandering and just messing up the maps. And so my fear is if we try to do the whole thing, we'll end up with absolutely nothing.
So what are some of the pieces of the current system that you would want to keep in any kind of new system or a hybrid system? And what are some of the things that you would try to remove?
Well, and some of it is already in the Constitution. Constitution says, obey follow the boundaries, compact and contiguous. Oh, and population. I think what we have done in the past, sometimes in order to meet court edicts, is we have listened too much to the myth of population equality, and in so doing, fed numbers into a computer that ended up with districts. What was the famous one about, was it Goofy kicking Donald Duck or Donald Duck kicking Goofy? But yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you try to get the population down to 1 or 2 or 3 people in a district of 700,000 or 800,000.
So are you saying that district in particular came out the way it did simply because they were trying to get to population equality?
Population and politics. There's no doubt that this is a political process. It's been political again since the 12th or the 13th century. I think we can make it a little less hyper-partisan. I don't think we can make it completely unpolitical. Again, I'll go Dr. Argall on you. What is politics? Politics determines who gets what. Well, when we're drawing boundaries, even if the boundaries are drawn by the College of Vestal Virgins, that's still a political decision.
So, I mean, if you're obviously against gerrymandering, you recognize that it happens. There's a particular section in SB 222 that says, when drawing the maps, that the committee shall not draw a map that unduly favors one party over another. Are you okay with keeping that provision in the bill?
That's one of the sections we're still working on.
Are there people who disagree with that?
There are people that think that that's a very difficult goal to attain. And again, our goal is to pass a piece of legislation that meets court muster. Our goal is not to pass something that gets thrown into the trash can the first time a judge says, oh, well, you helped candidate X when you promised to be completely nonpartisan or bipartisan.
Are you anticipating that this goes to the courts no matter what?
I am normally a pretty optimistic guy, but given the world we live in today, I would be shocked if everyone just joins hands, sings Kumbaya, and doesn't file a challenge.
Right. So I want to shift gears a little bit more, and perhaps we can come back to redistricting if I think of any more questions. But I want to talk about an issue that's sort of adjacent to redistricting. I mean, it all kind of ties into this. So I want to talk about election reform. You told the Associated Press that commissioning an audit of the 2020 election is still a possibility. You cited a bill from Senator Mensch, I believe, that would give the Auditor General the authority to audit the 2020 election specifically. And I know you're a co-sponsor of that bill. Along with, I should add, Senator Doug Mastriano, who recently went to Arizona to tour the Republican Commissioned hand recount of the ballots in Maricopa County. And I know that you told the Capital Star that you were trying to approve such an audit in the coming weeks, or at least bring it to your committee. And I know that former President Donald Trump called you out by name along with Senator Jake Corman and said that this kind of forensic audit should take place immediately. And the House has said, you know, through Representative Seth Grove, that they aren't going to go along with that they've rejected the idea. And your leadership in the Senate, it seems, have been quiet about this. So, you know, you've come out and supported this. Can you tell me why?
I've said it many times. I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a king. Certainly the governor in the last year has been accused many times of trying to act more like a monarch than the leader of a Democratic, small d Democratic governor. And so I'm an agent of public opinion. I have to listen to the folks who talk to me, whether they come to the office, whether they see me when I'm walking my dog, when they grab me at the end of the Boy Scout, Eagle Scout ceremony. You know, that's who we are. We are agents of public opinion. I've heard from a lot of the people that I'm privileged to represent in Berks and Schuylkill counties who are very concerned about our election process, looking forward as well as looking backward. And so if we're ever going to try to bring more trust to the system, I think it's a good idea to take a second look or a third look and say, okay, did this work out exactly as it was supposed to by law? If 500 people showed up at the polls, do we know for sure that 500 votes were registered? If 30 votes, absentee votes, mail-in ballots were mailed and received at the county courthouse in Pottsville, were 30 votes counted? And so essentially it's a very careful recount, forensic audit. And so, yeah, I don't see the danger in it. I understand that there are people that think that, oh, this is the end of democracy as we know it. I just wish that, I think I've said it to reporters before, I feel a little bit sometimes like a guy working in a room with gasoline fumes, and I've got people out there flicking their lighters. And so I just think that it would not be a bad idea at all to proceed with an audit similar to what they're doing in Arizona. And again, that's another one of those issues that we hope to wrap up in the next few weeks. I know there's a lot of lawyers on both sides looking at the details of how that might be done.
So I understand that you need to respond to your constituents, and you're probably getting bombarded with calls and emails about that. But you know, multiple local, state, and federal election officials have said repeatedly that this was the most secure election, that there was no widespread voter fraud. Pennsylvania had 2 election audits. So, you know, does that not give you kind of a sense of security that really there was nothing wrong with the last election?
So if it was done once, what's the damage in doing it one more time to try to answer the concerns that people have? I just don't know what people are afraid of in allowing the audit to continue.
You don't think it'll cast doubt upon election officials who are, you know, administering the election?
It all depends on the results. The results could say everything was fine. The results could say, oh my God, you know, someone made a significant mistake. I think the people have the right to know the answer to that question.
So you've got constituents coming up to you and telling you that they think that there was a mistake in the election, or that, you know, there was some kind of fraud in the election, when we've got multiple officials at every state level telling us that that's not true, and we've got audits to show that that's not true. So when you respond to constituents, do you tell them that, you know, those things are just false claims?
I say they deserve to get an answer. And again, mistrust of government is not a new issue. When I'm teaching my classes and the students say, oh, well, you know, the mistrust of government began with Watergate or Iraq or Vietnam, I usually suggest they read the Declaration of Independence. You know, people in this country have mistrusted governments for a long, long time, frequently for good reason. And so I think that in a case like this, with so much mistrust out there, I think it's a good idea to be able to prove to people, yes, you're right. No, you're wrong. I think the audit could be helpful in that regard.
Would you agree that a mistrust of government was a contributing factor to the January 6th attack in Washington?
Absolutely.
So if we've got people mistrusting our government, do you not see a danger in that continuing if you present another audit because your constituents say that they mistrust the government? Is there not a danger in that?
I think you have danger whether you do the audit or you don't do the audit. I would hope that once the audit is complete, people from both sides, whether they voted for Donald Trump or voted against Donald Trump, would be able to be more accepting if they had the facts.
And the facts haven't been presented thus far, according to you?
There's plenty of facts out there, but no, they haven't convinced people that the issue deserves to be put to bed.
And you think that a third audit by the Auditor General will help confirm those facts and make people feel better?
Whether it's done by the Auditor General, whether it's commissioned by the House or the Senate, as was done out in Arizona, I am not hung up on how exactly the audit is completed. I just think that we should complete one.
Do you, I mean, the first two audits, right, were done by the election officials who administrate our elections. So do you have a problem with that? Or do you want it to be an independent third party? Do you want it to be someone in government?
I think it needs to be independent. I think that there's going to be mistrust if the same people that conducted the election conduct the audit. Remember, we're at a stage where, you know, Republicans don't trust Democrats, Democrats don't trust Republicans, independents don't trust anyone. That's why they're independents. And so, yeah, it needs to have some ways of saying that, look, we are looking at this from an outside perspective.
No, so the Auditor General is supposed to be independent, right? Would you feel more comfortable if it was someone from a government perspective versus someone like a company in Arizona that is backed by Republicans? I
think whoever does it should have the ability, they need to know what they're doing. They obviously need to understand election procedures. They need to understand the law. And yes, I think that if they possess a considerable degree of independence, that then helps us to put some of these questions to a final resolution.
And have you gotten, or do you think you'll get the support of Senate leadership for such an audit?
I'll know more on that in the next few weeks, but the discussions are underway. There's considerable interest in the issue, absolutely.
And I know that you've said, you know, when it comes to redistricting, you're not interested in moving legislation that you know is not going to pass, right? So the House has said through Seth Grove that this is a no-go, that he's focused on reforming the election law for future elections and that there will be no audit of past elections. So, how do you justify moving forward with this bill or resolution or whatever you decide to put up versus, knowing that this won't pass?
The House could do this independently of the Senate. The Senate could do this independently of the House. We could, of course, try to pass a bill and get the signature of the governor. There's more than one way to do this. And so I think if the governor continues to say, hell no, hell no, hell no, no audit, then of course the proponents are likely to look for ways that could perform this audit without the signature of the governor.
So one of those ways would be for your committee to subpoena ballots, is that right?
That's correct.
Right. And would you want to do it for the entire state? Would you want to do it for individual counties? And what's the rationale behind that?
Some of it comes to cost and time. Obviously, it's much quicker, much less expensive if you're only sampling a limited number of counties rather than if you try to do all 67. And so those are some of the details that we need to resolve. And again, sooner rather than later. I don't think it does any of us any good to continue this debate week after week after week.
And this would be paid for with taxpayer dollars?
Again, there are two options. One would be yes, do it through public funding. The other would be the Arizona model, in which they found, I guess, private donors willing to pick up the cost.
Okay, so if it is paid for by taxpayer dollars, I mean, you're going to be asking basically constituents to pay for this, and it would be for a subset of constituents. I know there's a lot apparently in your district, but you would be asking for a subset of constituents who refuse to accept what we already know from several election officials, from 2 audits that have already been done, that have presented so far, that the election was fair and secure. So, how do you justify that?
Again, this is a very imperfect democratic process to go back to Winston Churchill. We're never going to make everyone happy on this. I think our goal should be to do the best we can.
So why not just move forward and focus on future elections and election reform and things that, if you think that there was some errors in the election code that led to some of your concerns, why not just pay attention to that and focus on that?
I would hope we could do both. I would like to look forward as well as to verify the last election to make sure that it was conducted in Pennsylvania the way the governor and the Secretary of State insist that it was carried out.
And if you're looking forward, are there any specific election-related provisions that you would want to adopt? I know that you received the report that the special committee on election integrity put out a few weeks ago. As we know, Seth Rose put out his omnibus bill that has several things that are similar, including pre-canvassing, more strict voter ID requirements, signature verification for mail ballots, limits on drop boxes, and then his bill also creates early voting in 2025. So, the report has some similarities to that. Are there any in particular that you would recommend moving forward with?
I think the county commissioners, both Republicans and Democrats, have asked us to deal with 2 primary issues. You mentioned the pre-canvassing so that the ballot count can be conducted more quickly. No one wants to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 days after an election to know who won. And so I think that is a critical piece. They've also asked us to look at some of the deadlines for mail-in ballots and voter registration and absentee ballots, that if we continue to allow some of those deadlines to be too close to an election date, then that again makes it more likely that the system can collapse. So I would like to help them with that. And again, we did pass a constitutional amendment this week out of the Senate State Government Committee to begin the process of allowing voters to provide some kind of identification every time they vote. Again, people tell me that, when I check into the Red Roof in Harrisburg on a session night, they want to see my driver's license. And so I think there should be a way. I'm told that research would indicate that Republicans and Democrats and independents agree that some form of voter identification is appropriate without disenfranchising anyone. The devil's in the details. You need to do it right. But I do think that Judy Ward's bill would begin to start that long process of changing the Constitution in order to allow for that. So yeah, that issue alone has gotten a lot of attention.
And I want to clarify, so that bill is a constitutional amendment, which would again need to be passed twice and approved by voters, and it would require photo ID when you vote in person or by mail. It would require, I think, a photocopy of your identification to be included in your mail ballot. And I'm curious when you expect other legislation related to elections to be before your committee.
I would hope that we would have more this week to come.
Okay. And I know that voter ID, the governor has said that's a non-starter for him. He's not willing to negotiate that. And so it seems like you're in favor of taking the route that bypasses the governor's signature. Are there other places where you think that there can be negotiation with the governor, who said, he'll veto anything that is considered voter suppression to him?
I think if you look at the primary election, the governor kept saying that essentially that the governor is supreme and the House and the Senate and county governments shouldn't have anything to say with ending an emergency. The voters thought otherwise. And so constitutional amendment, quite honestly, wasn't my preference. But when the governor refuses to work with us and casts veto after veto after veto, this governor has vetoed more bills than I think any governor since Milton Schaap. I don't think that's a record he should be proud of. When he refuses to negotiate with the House and the Senate, when he sits on his perch and just says veto, veto, veto. Don't be surprised when the House and Senate look for more constitutional amendments. It's the one method that's left to us to go directly to the public and let the public decide. And again, there is no doubt in my mind, if we put the question on the ballot and we get a fair wording from the Department of State, the public will vote to allow some version of voter ID to become part of the Constitution.
It seems like that's definitely been a theme in Harrisburg, this clash between the governor and the legislature. So it'll be interesting to see kind of, full circle. You talk about how you're optimistic about coming at redistricting with in a bipartisan fashion. So it'll definitely be an interesting few months. I want to turn to reader questions. We just have a few more minutes left, and I want to start with one that I think is relevant to our conversation on elections, and then I want to get to a few redistricting questions before we run out of time. So, this question is from Matthew. Do you yourself believe that the election was fair and secure and accurate?
I've got some questions. I'd like to see the audit to verify whether we're right or wrong. There's simply, in some areas, I simply don't know who to believe.
I'm going to follow up from his question, but do those lingering questions give you doubt to whether the election was fair and secure?
Can't we do the audit and answer that so that we all have a final answer?
So is that a yes or a no?
That's a let's do the audit and find out.
Okay. All right, let me see these, let me look through a couple of these questions. Okay, here's a kind of detailed one about the criteria of the maps from Drew. Would you prioritize municipal cohesiveness in the maps over drawing maps that would produce racially equitable results that are perhaps better representative of PA's changing demographics? So I think, in other words, he's asking, you know, do you prioritize municipal cohesiveness over creating more majority minority districts and that sort of thing?
I think under federal law, we're required to do both. This is one of those areas where I wish I had an attorney whispering in my ear right now. But my goal would be to try to say that they don't need to be competing. We should be able to respect boundaries and respect minority voting rights at the same time.
Okay. Let me see if there's a few others. Got a lot of questions related to voter ID and the election. So give me 1 second. Another one, I don't know who this one is from, but back to the election, the question is, why haven't the first 2 audits answered the question as to whether or not this election was fair and secure? You know, do you accept those findings?
I guess I would ask people just to walk the streets of Schuylkill County with me, or walk the streets of Berks County with me. I don't know why people are so mistrusting of the results. I just know that they are. And if I'm going to try to breathe more trust into the system, I think that we can't just ignore those people who have doubts.
I'm trying to look for one more redistricting question. I don't know if you've been able to see this chat, but people have a lot of questions. They have a lot to say. So.
Here, I was afraid no one was going to tune in, so I guess we don't have to worry about that.
Okay. And Chris, if you see any that that stood out to you as well. Oh, here's a good one. Rachel asks, will you sponsor a constitutional amendment to give citizens the right of direct referendum? I believe she's referring to a ballot initiative. So allowing, and Rachel, you can chime in if I'm butchering your question, but in a lot of states, voters can, through a petition or some other method, get a constitutional amendment on a question on the ballot. We cannot do that in Pennsylvania. So I think her question is, would you sponsor something to make that available to people?
The devil's gonna be in the details on that one as well. I've seen so many different versions. I don't want to go the way of some states where the ballot is literally clogged every year and the special interests come in and spend millions of dollars on that whole process. I do think that some of the other versions make more sense, where if a bill has consistently shown some degree of support in the House or Senate, but for whatever reason hasn't been able to make it across the final boundary, then perhaps it would make sense. And so I'm reluctant to go all the way on that issue, but I do think that there might be some versions that I could support.
Right, and I should note that this is the way that a lot of independent redistricting commissions have been formed, where states have, citizens have gotten together and gotten a petition to create an independent redistricting commission, or in some cases a hybrid. And I will also note that I have not been in Pennsylvania for very long, but I have seen a lot of ballot questions on each of our elections. So I don't know how bogged down, how much more bogged down it gets, but
Go to California and report back.
that's true. Okay, so I think we are just about out of time. I will kick it back to Chris in a moment, but Senator, I just want to thank you again. I know you're very busy, and we will hopefully have you back on sometime to answer the rest of these hundreds of questions that we've gotten, and perhaps get you on after a draft of the congressional map is released to explain it. But thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
Great, thank you, Marie. Thank you, Senator. This was a great conversation. I think it was enlightening for folks who joined us. Thank you, Marie, for your probing question. One thing I just wanted to chime in with real quick, Senator, just to follow up on the election results. So, I mean, based on what you're saying and wanting this audit to sort of solve questions that you say are out there, does that mean, so as it stands right now, do you fully accept the results as legitimate of the November election in Pennsylvania, or not at this time?
I mean, the results are the results. The Electoral College has spoken, the president has been sworn in. I understand that's a reality, but do I have 100% confidence that when the state Supreme Court made last-minute decisions contrary to legislative intent, or when the Department of State and the governor completely ignored what the House and the Senate intended in passing Act 77, that everything was perfect? No, I'd really like us to take a detailed review of that. That's why we're looking at changing pieces of the election legislation. And it's also why I think it wouldn't hurt at all to go back, do that audit, and say, how exactly did that work out?
So let me just ask one last thing then. When a constituent contacts you and says that they don't trust the outcome, the results that you said are settled, that they don't trust the results of the election, what do you say to them? Do you accept the results that they are as they should be?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Chris.
Do you accept the results of the election, not how it was run, not the process, but the end result of who was elected as legitimate and the proper outcome? And when a constituent talks to you and casts doubt on the outcome, do you tell them that no, that was the proper outcome? We can argue about how it was run, and I'm sure there are places to fix, but do you say to them that you have trust in the outcome?
I have questions about the conduct. We've already discussed that. I think the audit will help us to understand. But again, I have no doubt about who's in the White House right now. I assume he's there today. And so I've been trying to, explain to the people that I represent that part of the process is over. But I still really strongly believe that we should try to build some additional trust into the system, and telling all of my constituents to drop dead who are interested in this issue, as some folks have suggested, I think is a bad idea. I really think that we need to try to work with everyone and allow those kind of questions to be aired.
Great, thanks. Well, we're right at time. So again, I wanted to thank Marie and Senator Argall for taking the time for this really important discussion. While there's still a long way to go in the redistricting process, events like this are really important forums to exchange ideas, keep motivated, to fight for transparency and a representative government for all in Pennsylvania, something I think we can all agree on. And as we say at the end of all of our events, information is power, but only if you use it. So take what you learned today, get involved in your community, and continue the discussion. And of course, you can stay up to date with Spotlight PA. Today's event was a free public service of Spotlight PA. And so this is a time I'd like to remind any of you who have not yet made a contribution and are willing and able to do so, please go to spotlightpa.org/donate. We can only run these events with your support. Contributions of any amount help us keep this programming free for everyone, particularly those who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. And the support goes directly back to our journalism. So once again, I want to thank Marie. I want to thank the senator, and hopefully we can keep this discussion going. And I wish everyone a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Take care.